The Ukrainian military liberated the village of Vysokopoly, Kherson region. Source: Deputy Head of the Office of the President Kirill Tymoshenko on Facebook, Head of the Presidential Office Andriy Yermak on Twitter, Telegram channels. Details: Tymoshenko published a photo of the installation of the Ukrainian flag on the roof of the building. He added the signature, Vysokopoly, Kherson region, Ukraine. Today. Earlier, the same photo was published by the head of the OP Andriy Yermak, but without a caption. Before that, a number of Ukrainian and Russian Telegram channels reported on the liberation of Vysokopoly, but there was no official information about this. In particular, the former leader of the DPR terrorist organization Igor Girkin Strelkov called the liberation of Vysokopoly by the Ukrainian forces a sensitive tactical failure for the Russians. The evening summary of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine did not report the liberation of Vysokopoly. President Volodymyr Zelensky announced the liberation of 2 settlements in southern Ukraine and 1 in the Donetsk region. Direct speech: Today I want to thank the soldiers of the 63rd Battalion of the 103rd Terror Defense Brigade, who ensured the result in the Donetsk region. The settlement was liberated. The 54th Brigade also made good steps in the direction of Lysychansk-Seversk, moved forward, occupied certain heights. I also want to mention the 42nd Separate Motorized Infantry Battalion. Thanks to his heroic actions, 2 settlements in the south of our state were liberated. Earlier on Sunday, it became known that the Ukrainian military had liberated the village of Vysokopoly, Kherson region. Now the last unfrozen reserves of Russia are in the Chinese trap. The Russian authorities have invested 17% of their own gold and foreign exchange reserves in the yuan, but now they are forced to admit that it is simply impossible to withdraw funds from Chinese assets. This is reported by the Moscow Times. The sale of yuan, in which more than $100 billion was invested from the gold and foreign exchange reserves as of January 1, requires a separate agreement with China. This is stated in the presentation of the Central Bank of the Russian Federation, prepared for a meeting with officials on the future fate of the reserves and plans fill them with friendly currencies, the article notes. According to the documents cited by the publication, the Russian authorities are discussing the possibility of additional acquisition of yuan and other soft currencies for $70 billion. At the same time, the Central Bank of the Russian Federation admits that after the imposition of sanctions and a ban on transactions with dollars and euros, it is not easy to find assets for gold reserves. The choice is limited to a few friendly countries. But the Turkish lira cannot get out of a corkscrew, and has lost 90% of its value in 10 years. And the UAE dirham, according to the presentation, is prone to political risks. American officials have frequented the Emirates, who demand not to turn Dubai into a hub to circumvent sanctions, notes the Moscow Times. Only the yuan remains, but there is a problem with it. It is relatively easy to invest in Chinese assets, but not to withdraw money back. This requires the permission of the Chinese authorities, and it will be very difficult to obtain it in a crisis, the central bank believes, the Moscow Times emphasizes. Thus, now the last non-frozen reserves of Russia are in the Chinese trap. Prime Minister of Ukraine Denis Shmyhal, at a meeting with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, suggested ways in which Germany could organize the supply of Leopard 2 tanks. We talked about this topic. We even suggested ways in which Germany could supply these tanks to Ukraine, the Ukrainian Prime Minister said at a briefing after a meeting with the Chancellor. At the same time, he clarified that he could not disclose all the agreements and details of the conversation. But we discussed all these issues about tanks and other military systems for Ukraine in an absolutely constructive way, Shmyhal said, and added that he was very optimistic about the prospect of obtaining tanks. What is known about the Leopard 2 tanks? This is the main tank of the German army, is in service with Austria, Spain, Hungary, Poland, other NATO allies, as well as Singapore and Switzerland. In total, since 1979, about 3,200 units have been produced. Shmyhal offered Scholz a way to supply Leopard 2 tanks. Equipped with a powerful 120mm Rheinmetall RH-120 smoothbore gun. A 7.62mm MG3 machine gun is paired with the cannon. Another MG3 is in the turret on the hatch. In addition, there are modifications with weapons that allow you to fire Israeli Lahat ATGMs. Recall that in July, the Bundestag itself directly stated the need to supply Leopard tanks to Ukraine. And in August, Spain changed its mind about sending German Leopards, since they are all in poor condition. Russia is ready to negotiate with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on how Moscow's conditions will be met to end the war, Russian presidential spokesman Dmitry Peskov said. Details, in an interview for the Moscow Kremlin. Putin propaganda program. Peskov was asked what Russia should talk about with Zelensky, who says that he will not conduct any negotiations with Moscow. Peskov's direct speech, on how our conditions will be met. Certainly, Russia's conditions remain the same, ed. Closing parenthesis. The operation is proceeding on its own, all goals will be achieved. Recall, earlier, the Kremlin sharply reduced the use of the term denazification, which the president of the aggressor country Vladimir Putin, along with demilitarization, mentioned as the reason for the outbreak of war in Ukraine.